Dave, thank you so much for your thoughtful and meaningful prayer on our behalf. And this morning, we are in our July sermon series called a summer mixtape. And just like a musical mixtape blends together diverse tracks to make a beautiful and meaningful soundtrack, our lives, I believe, are meant to be made up of key spiritual rhythms, and you will observe that I will say the word rhythms with a really strong Caribbean accent when I go off of being conscious of it, so just be aware of that, and so it won't be like rhythm. And our lives are to be grounded in these rhythms as we seek to follow Jesus. This is why this month we are making efforts to cultivate and to curate a spiritual mixtape that will be a collection of biblical truths and, I believe, life-giving guides to help us to live in this season. As you saw on the pre-rolled video, our focus will be on mission, which we heard about last week from our international workers that we partner with. And today we're going to be focusing on rest, and next week we will touch on prayer. And as we focus on rest today, I want to share with you a little bit about how my family structured our schedule during my upbringing as an adolescent when I lived with my parents. Every Sunday, we attended a 2.5-hour, and that's the earliest you would go, it could be longer, worship service in the Sunday mornings. And we were regular churchgoers, as my dad was a pastor. And every Sunday evening, we also attended a 2-hour worship experience. So that was our Sundays. So that was filled with going to church in the morning and then going to church at night. From Monday to Friday, my sisters and I, like everyone else, like you would imagine, we attended school for several hours each day, and my parents both worked full-time jobs. My dad worked too, because not only was he a pastor, he was also a teacher, and at one point a principal, and my mom did a lot of work as well. And during the afternoons and the evenings, like many of you did when you were younger, or if you're in school right now, my sisters and I participated in extracurricular activities like music lessons. I played basketball almost every day as well. Even though I don't have the height for it, I'm sure I could beat you at it. And I also played lots of cricket as well growing up. And we also attended church every Wednesday evening for another 2-hour session for midweek prayer meetings and Bible studies. And on Friday nights, my sisters and I went to youth group meeting for another 2.5 to 3 hour session. On top of all of this, my dad would attend week meetings almost every day of the week for board, men's ministry, and a bunch of different things. And my mom would also attend an intercessory prayer group. And as you would imagine, being in school, we had homework to complete. And it was at a time and in a culture where teacher could beat you if you didn't get your homework done. And so I was never really afraid of that, but I had that dooming reality of I got to get my work done because tomorrow when you go to school, teacher's going to check everything. And so we had to get our assignments done. And for whatever reason, even though we went to church as frequently as we did, we also included practices on top of these times for events that were coming up. Whether it be dancing recitals, can you imagine me doing different church dances? Because in the Caribbean, you have to be really holy in your movements. And so you're just moving your hands only and no other parts of your body practicing dancing moves, and had to recite poems that were like 4 stanzas long for different sessions that would happen in the church. And if you couldn't say it, people would make fun of you because it's a culture where teasing is pitched really high. And so all of these activities were packed in to Sunday to Friday. Now we come to Saturday. Saturday was a day filled with many chores. My mom probably woke up every Saturday morning at around 5 a.m. to do laundry. She also cleaned the house thoroughly. And in the Caribbean, we normally have a really big breakfast on Sunday mornings where we have codfish, and we also have a massive lunch after church. And so she would prepare that meal the night before on Saturdays as well. And she also would get us all ready for church. My sisters took the time to clean their rooms, and they did their homework and other things that I probably was ignoring because I really didn't pay attention that closely. And my dad, he prepped his message for the next day continually after he started early in the week. He ironed all of his clothes for every single appointment that he had for the next week on Saturdays. And almost every weekend, he mowed the lawn until I was old enough to join him with doing that. And we lived on a property that was almost an acre. And so that was Saturday. And on top of that, speaking for Prince, at the age of 7, I started washing vehicles, so cleaning the cars. And so we normally had 2 or so vehicles, and in the Caribbean, you're not allowed only to just go to a drive-in and have it washed. You have to clean the entire exterior really deeply. And so I'd vacuum every nook and cranny, and then I'd have to clean the mats, then I'd have to dust off everything inside, and then I'd have to go outside the vehicle and clean all 4 of the wheelhouses. That's what we call them. I don't know what the right term is. Not just the tires, but get up in all the mud, because we don't have nice roads like we have here, and so it's filled with a chunky mud, and I had to get it all out. And that I also started driving at 7. Again, different culture, don't judge. But that's one of the reasons why I enjoyed cleaning the vehicles, because I got to drive the car. And that process took 2 hours for each vehicle as well. So as you would imagine, life in our family was incredibly busy. The only time that I remember life not being full like that was when we went on vacation for 3 weeks or so. But then my sisters and my parents filled the time with shopping almost every day, which I hated. And so perhaps your family lived this way or in a similar way. Or maybe you are living this way right now. You have kids that attend hockey practice at 5 a.m. There are soccer practices that have to be attended to as well. There are basketball tournaments that are taking place. There are taekwondo, as well as music lessons and a bunch of different things. Not to mention that the house won't clean itself. You have bills to pay, and so you have to work. And so I would imagine that many of our calendars would look like an elaborate color palette representing many different responsibilities that we have to work away at. And perhaps like me, in my upbringing, the only time you truly got a break was when you went to a cabin someplace on vacation or traveled with your family. Now, I recognize that some of you hear this and think to yourself, that just sounds awful. And you probably have developed habits in your life where you have intentionally set aside a day to be at rest called the Sabbath. And I hope this is true for a significant number of you where you have spent time intentionally resting and seeking God's face in that way. But in full transparency, I haven't been consistent in observing a Sabbath day over much of my life. And I would imagine that most of you aren't as well. And if we as believers do not take the time to set aside for intentional rest and engagement in this way, how much more do we think people in our culture, a culture that is driven by success, by material accumulation, set aside time for doing these things? This is why Mark Buchanan notes in his book, in a culture of busyness, or in a culture where busyness is a fetish and stillness is laziness, rest is a sloth. So it shouldn't surprise us then that a recent survey that was conducted across Canada where 1,500 professionals were asked to talk about their work experiences, that revealed that 42% of workers experienced burnout last year, 47% have reported experiencing burnout this year, 33% experienced burnout in 2023. And so we see the number steadily increasing. And the main factors driving these high levels of burnout in our culture are the heavy workloads and long hours that we put in, the emotional or mental exhaustion from high-stress tasks, and poor work-life balance. Some of the Canadians experiencing the highest levels of burnout are working parents, which many of you are, and millennial professionals. So 51% are working parents, and 50% are millennials. And so if you're born between 1980 to 1995 or so, you fall within this category. So with these statistics in mind, coupled with the reality that if we have an awareness of Scripture, that God invites us to participate and observe a Sabbath, the theme of this sermon this morning is, the world will keep spinning, yet we are called to rest. The world will keep spinning, time will keep advancing, life will consistently move forward, work continues, expectations will rise, urgent matters will always appear, yet time does not slow down. And as the world continues to push forward with great rapid pace, our tasks and responsibilities are seemingly endless, yet we are limited. We are finite beings. This makes it essential for you and for I to live in an intentional way to foster an environment within our lives that is conducive to our well-being. And this happens as we create regular margins within our time and within our lives to focus on what matters most. Because the truth is, the world is spinning for our loved ones as well. Just as time is going forward for us, all of us are uniquely aware of that for the people that we love, time is spinning and the time is going forward for them as well. And one day, when we look back on our journeys, we might be tempted to ask ourselves, where did the time go? Especially when it comes to engaging with the people that we love most, whether it be our children, our spouses, our grandparents, our grandchildren, and other loved ones. Therefore, the call to rest as the world keeps going forward at a rapid pace is one that we should not ignore. Because even though we may gain lots of accumulation and material possessions, while we ignore ourselves and our rest, the drawbacks are way too costly for us to sacrifice ourselves on the altar of this. Considering this is how I want us to approach the theme today. We're going to look at this theme by having an exploration into a biblical survey of the Sabbath. And then I'm going to look at the purpose of the Sabbath, and I want to offer you 3 recommendations that come from our survey and come from the purpose statement of what the Sabbath is about. And so we'll begin our biblical survey by looking at what the scripture has to say about work. I know it might sound counterintuitive to talk about the Sabbath starting from work, but I think it frames things for us well. And so in the opening passage of Genesis, we learn that God was purposefully at work when he created the world. The scriptures inform us that God worked for 6 days and rested on the 7th day. And after completing his work, we are told that he looked at his creation and described it as good. And when he looked at humanity, he described humanity as being very good. This demonstrates to us that meaningful and purposeful work, which can be described as good, originates from God himself. And it is a kind of work that we are called to emulate as well. It's the kind of work that we are called to embrace and that we are called to model in our lives. As image bearers of God, being at work is an essential part of what it means for us to live and what it means for us to be human. This is emphasized not only when we consider God's activity during creation, but also when we observe Adam, because he was given the task of tending the Garden of Eden before sin entered the world, confirming that work was a part of God's perfect design and sinless creation. Work was not a result of the fall. I know sometimes we might be tempted to think that we have to go out and earn our living because things went awry. No, by looking at the experience of Adam, we see that work was created before sin was introduced into the picture. However, as we know, the fall made work a lot more difficult. And so, at the beginning, I could imagine that as Adam was doing his work, tending the garden, it was probably a meaningful and a purposeful endeavor that filled him with joy and satisfaction. And he looked around at what he did and thought to himself, this is good, because he was emulating his father. The same applies to us as well. Each and every one of us in this room have been given gifts and resources, and I believe firmly that God has given us these gifts, these talents, and these resources to utilize them to produce good and meaningful work in his name. Whether we are working at home, on a construction site, in an office, a classroom, a vehicle, in a studio or a field, it doesn't matter where it is. Whatever we're doing that is related to work, God is calling us to engage in good and meaningful activity. As John Mark Comer comments in his book, Garden City, we were put on the earth because the entire cosmos is God's temple, to make the invisible God visible, to show the world what God is like. We are the creators, representatives of his creation. And so, we as human beings, created in the image of God, we were created to represent God in our work. But here's the thing. We were also created to represent God in how we engage in rest. Not just the work, but also how we engage in rest. Just as God rested on the seventh day after he created the world, we too are to disengage from our ordinary work to engage in a periodic time of rest as well. You know, the thing is, one could argue that God, being all-powerful, he did not and he does not need to rest. He doesn't get tired. He doesn't get weary. He doesn't lose energy. He doesn't need to sleep like we do. And so why else would he include within the scriptural narrative that we have before us that he engaged in a period of rest other than to set a template for us to embrace and to model and to take heart to? And so this is the foundational truth of a scriptural understanding of the Sabbath. It is based on the reality that God himself, the author and the creator of all things, who is all-powerful, rested, so we too should also rest. And it goes further within the scriptures where we see God's revelation of the 10 Commandments given to Moses for the Israelites to follow in Exodus 20, verses 8 to 11, where we read, "Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and your daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and your foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the seventh day he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy." Later on in Exodus 31, we note that the Sabbath was rooted in creation and commanded by the law given to Moses, but it also established a covenant between God and Israel. A covenant that is based on trust because it is rooted in the fact that God rescued the people of Israel from Egyptian slavery. Deuteronomy chapter 5 verses 15 reveals this. "Remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, but the Lord your God brought you out with his strong hand and powerful arm. That is why the Lord your God commanded you to rest on the Sabbath day." The command to rest comes from our understanding that our Creator God is our sustainer and our provider of all things. He's our ultimate redeemer and our ultimate rescuer. And he can be trusted more than we can be trusted to care for ourselves. While we put effort into the work that we do, while we sweat, while we engage in hard work, some of you may even sweat like Pastor Prince does when he preaches, which Nan reminds me about every week. And so while we do that, the reality is our concerted effort is not based on our own strength, but is based on the fact of who God is. That is why we respond to the invitation to rest. And this is why God also reveals that we should delight in the Sabbath day. He revealed this to us through the prophet Isaiah, who wrote, "Enjoy the Sabbath and speak of it with delight as the Lord's holy day. Honor the Sabbath in everything you do on that day. And don't follow your own desires or talk idly." So with this quick overview of a biblical understanding of the Sabbath rooted in the Old Testament, I want us to go and touch on in a bit about what Jesus has to say about the Sabbath, which reveals to us the purpose of the Sabbath. But before we do that, maybe you might be thinking to yourselves, "Prince, does the day that we observe the Sabbath matter?" Because after all the passages that I've referred to so far mention the seventh day. And my best friend, a young man by the name of Kem, who I met when I was my son's age, and who went with every class level with me throughout school, he's a Seventh-day Adventist. And so we always would have back and forths about which day should we engage with the Sabbath. And so we're going to touch on that now. The scriptures tell us that the early church met regularly on Sundays. We read about these gatherings all throughout the New Testament, and we see it emphasized specifically in books like Acts chapter 20, verse 7, and 1 Corinthians 16, verse 2. And as you might expect, the reason why the early church worshipped on a Sunday was because Jesus was resurrected on the first day of the week. And so that was done to commemorate and give honor to Jesus' resurrection. For this reason, many believers have practiced a Sabbath-like behavior on a Sunday morning. And the Apostle Paul even brought more freedom when he wrote in Romans 14, in the same way, some of you think one day is more holy than another, while others think every day is alike. You should each be fully convinced that whichever day you choose is acceptable. Those who worship the Lord on a special day do it to honor him. The inference we can draw from Paul's words about the Sabbath is that we should be faithful in observing a Sabbath day of intentional rest based on the convictions that we receive on the day that we want to engage in this activity. So rather than getting bogged down about Saturday or Sunday, the reality is our focus should be on if God is saying to us, practice the Sabbath on this day, that is the day that you should be doing it, and you do so in a manner that gives honor to God. So now we're going to shift our attention to the purpose of the Sabbath. And as we do this, I want you to turn your attention to Mark chapter 2, verses 23 to 28. And here's what the passage says. One Sabbath day, as Jesus was walking through some grain fields, his disciples began breaking off heads of grain to eat. But the Pharisees said to Jesus, "Look, why are they breaking the law by harvesting the grain on the Sabbath?" Jesus said to them, "Haven't you ever read in the scriptures that what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He went into the house of God during the days when Abiathar was high priest and broke the law by eating the sacred loaves of bread that only the priests are allowed to eat. He also gave some to his companions." Then Jesus said to them, "The Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people and not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even over the Sabbath." In this scriptural unit, we see Jesus having a Sabbath day encounter with a group of people who liked to give him a hard time. They opposed him quite a bit. It was the Pharisees. On this particular occasion, Jesus' disciples were walking through a grain field and they became overwhelmed by hunger. They were famished. And so it would be like us walking amongst a field and we see an apple and we decided to pick it from the tree and we decided to eat it to satisfy our hunger. But the problem arose in the manner in which they were believed to have plucked the grain from the harvest that was there. The problem stemmed from the fact that there is a traditional Jewish document known as the Mishnah, which lists 39 Sabbath rules that people were expected to follow. And by plucking the grain in the manner that they did, Jesus' disciples, in the eyes of the Pharisees, engaged in harvesting, which means that they were working on the Sabbath day. And work was considered a capital offense on the Sabbath day. And so this is what they brought to Jesus. They said, "Hey, your disciples are harvesting on the Sabbath. What are you going to do about it?" And Jesus decides, hey, I'm going to respond to your challenge by referencing the king that most Israelites consider to be the greatest king in the history of the nation. He references an account in King David's life, where David and his friends, while they were on the run from King Saul, after David was anointed to be the next king of Israel, as Saul was trying to eliminate him, they became hungry as well. And so I don't know why they chose to go to the temple to get food, but they decided to go to the temple. And when they got to the temple, they discovered that, hey, the only thing that was available for them to eat was consecrated bread. And the consecrated bread was only permitted to be eaten by the priest. So David was in a position where he and his companions would break the law if they ate the bread. And you know what? They ate the bread because they were hungry. And what the story helps us to see is that the needs of humanity comes above any ritualistic observances. And Jesus applies the same logic when it comes to the Sabbath. He allows the Pharisees to see that, hey, the Sabbath was meant to meet the needs of people and not the other way around. Yes, it is something that we observe and that we are faithful to, but we observe it so that it can help us to find sustenance and nourishment in our lives. The purpose of the Sabbath is fundamentally to be a day dedicated to holistic renewal through rest and worship. Sometimes the renewal that people experience on the Sabbath is physical. We see examples of this within the scriptures where Jesus heals on the Sabbath and people who were once ill experiences restoration. Other times, the renewal that we experience on the Sabbath day comes to us so that we can find relief to the mental anguish that we're feeling. Occasionally, Sabbath renewal comes to us in a manner that it helps us to see bonded relationships that have been broken, remended, because the reality is when we create space for intentionally connecting with God and connecting with each other, chances are high that our relationships will be brought back together. So I'm going to say something probably a little bit, I don't think it's offensive, but maybe a poke. If you're probably experiencing prolonged periods where you find tension within your marital bond, I wonder if engaging in a Sabbath day activity together will help to bring restoration to that as well. Where you take time away from the things that distract you, and I'm guilty of this, Marissa will be the first to tell you, will distract you, to then spend time together worshiping God and doing fun and life-giving activities that brings restoration of life and bonds being mended together. Because the truth is, the Sabbath is a day dedicated to bringing wholeness, restoration, and life in spaces where brokenness exists. Timothy Keller frames this well when he wrote, "The purpose of Sabbath is not simply to rejuvenate yourself in order to do more production, nor it is the pursuit of pleasure. The purpose of Sabbath is to enjoy your God, life in general, what you have accomplished in the world through his help, and the freedom you have in gospel, and the freedom from slavery of any material object or human expectation. The Sabbath is a sign of the hope that we have in the world to come." With this in mind, I want to ask you a question that is introspective. Where are you longing for renewal in your life today? As you've come into this sanctuary space, in this place of worship, where have you been longing for God to bring a measure of renewal? Is it physically? Is it a mental renewal and rejuvenation that you're hoping for? Is it relationally? Is it in some other means? The reality is, one of the gifts that I believe that God has clearly revealed to us to help us to find renewal in our lives is through purposefully taking time to pause from the things that we regularly do to find enjoyment with him, enjoyment in activities that fill our cups, and to find enjoyment with the people that we love. I know we're all busy. I know that we all have a lot that we need to do. I know that if I were to look at your calendars on your phone, it would be filled with many important tasks. We're not doing trivial things. Most of us are people with great intentionality and who want to achieve things in this world. But despite all of these realities that we have, we must remember that Jesus said that the Sabbath was made for us, to be a gift to us. And we also must remember that the work around us and the work that we have is infinite, but you and I are not. One of my favorite things to do as a pastor is to go for pastoral care visits with elderly people. Since I was a little boy, when my dad would take me on what we call visitations with him, I had the chance to really interact with elderly people, and I love elderly people because The wisdom and the insights that are shared are so profound. And each time I go into a senior's residence home or anything like that, the amount of times that I'm told that, hey, Prince, focus on the things that matter most. The time is fleeting. Yes, I know you're driven. I probably wear it on my sleeves, and I know all of you guys are too. But how are things with you and Marissa? Are you spending time with her? How are things with you and your mom and your dad, who you need to call more? We have to create margin for these activities. And one of the ways that we can do that is through Sabbath. Considering this, I want to give us 3 recommendations quickly, and they are: we need to evaluate, we need to embrace, and we need to enjoy. When it comes to evaluation, I believe that one of the first steps that we should do when we think about incorporating the Sabbath into our lives is to really assess the day in our lives that best works for us to engage in the Sabbath. For most of you, it's a Sunday, you are off of work, and you have time to come for worship, and you can have time to spend time with family. You can also get a nap in the afternoon. For me, Sundays don't work, because I'm working. But I also need to find a day, traditionally it has been Friday, to do Sabbath engagement. And so I'd encourage you to evaluate the day that works best for you and to engage with it. Second thing as it relates to evaluation is to consider what matters most. Recently, I had my son Caius on my lap, and you may not know this, but I'm a deep feeler. If you look at my Myers-Briggs, I'm an ISFP, and so feeling is a big part of how I interpret the world. And as he sat on my lap, I thought to myself that, hey, it's just yesterday I remember taking his mom to the hospital when he was about to be born after I watched my favorite quarterback snap his Achilles, Aaron Rodgers. And as we got to the hospital, we were there, and he was born that September morning, and in a couple of months, he's going to be 2. And I've been thinking that just like I left my home and moved countries, what if he does that to me? And can my heart take that? So what I sensed God saying to me was, make every moment count with him. Every day, spend time uninterrupted and distracted from your phone, from the podcast that you love, to spend time with him. Included in that, weekly, spend time on a Sabbath day doing fun things with him as well. Each of you have your version of a Caius. The people that you love, probably your children, your parents, and other loved ones. And really think about the reality of that relationship. Some of you have kids that are taken off, and you wonder, like, what's going to become of the relationship? And I would say, develop a Sabbath routine even with them, so that they can spend time with you and you can deepen your bonds together. And this brings me to the second recommendation: embrace. After your evaluation, embrace the reality of the Sabbath day. I know sometimes we might be tempted to think, you know what, there's so many things that I have to do that I actually can't do this. Prince, this sounds great. Scripture, this sounds great. God, this sounds great. But you don't understand how busy I am, God, so I can't do this. But he does understand how busy you are, and he gave you the busy things to do. So he knows that you can sustain it. And so embrace the Sabbath day reality. Once you pick the day, embrace it and engage with it with thoughtfulness. And also embrace it in such a way that it becomes something that you view as a source of enjoyment. One of my friends, Dwayne Taves, our assistant district superintendent, he would ask me, Prince, are you preaching this weekend? Yeah, and I would say, yes, I have to. Then he would say, no, you get to. You get to. In a similar manner, you get to engage in the Sabbath. It's not a matter of have to, you get to. So embrace it from that perspective. And the third recommendation that I have is to enjoy it. It doesn't have to be viewed, well, I talked about my best friend earlier. His Sabbath sounded awful. He couldn't talk to me on the phone because we couldn't watch sports together or anything like that. And that's not the sense I get from Scripture. I think we are supposed to be doing things that are spiritual in nature, but also fill our cups. So if you love painting, paint. If you like to read, read. If you like to write, write. If you like to go out and play golf, play golf. If you like to play basketball, play basketball. I see you, Jim. If you like to ride your motorcycle, ride your motorcycle. Whatever it is fills you with a sense of joy and happiness. Engage with it on the Sabbath day and make it a moment each week that you look forward to with great anticipation. Don't view it like when our parents would force us to eat vegetables. Another Caribbean word that I say, vegetables, I have to really put some intentionality in that one. As well as the fact that, but view it as like a nice ribeye steak that's medium rare, and it's ready to go down like butter, all right? And that's what the Sabbath should be like, a beautiful steak. And if you don't eat meat, I'm sorry. The reality is it's awesome. And so the 3 recommendations again: evaluate, embrace, and enjoy. So if you're here today as we prepare to go before God in prayer, and you have sensed in your heart that, you know what, I want to engage in the Sabbath, but I really, truly don't know how I'm going to fit all of this into my schedule to give up a full day to focus on restorative activities. My encouragement to you is to come before God in prayer today saying, hey, God, give me the wisdom and the discernment to do this, and to even to think about the things that you're inviting me to pause and to maybe even to stop altogether to create bandwidth for me to engage in this. Perhaps you're here this morning and you say, you know what, yes, I'm in that place where I've evaluated, but I'm struggling with the embracement side of things. My encouragement to you is to go before God in prayer saying to him, yes, Father, fill me with your perspective on what the Sabbath day could be like so that I can view it as an opportunity to look forward to rather than something to run from. And if you're here today as well and you're saying to yourself, you know what, I have engaged in the Sabbath, and the reality is I haven't found it to be meaningful or fulfilling. My encouragement to you is to pray to God to give you insight into some of the things that he may want you to shift on the day so that you can find meaning and connection with him as you participate on this sacred day as well. And so I ask you the question again, what type of renewal are you longing for? If I didn't mention it and it's something on your heart, I'm going to bring it before God in prayer generally, but I also want to remind you that in a moment, we're going to have prayer team stationed at the back by the cross and also here at the front, and they would be happy to bring your personalized requests to God. But at this time, I invite you all to join me in prayer as I pray on our behalf. Jesus, we are thankful for you. We are thankful for the immense gifts that you give us. God, we thank you that we have the capacity, most of us, to work and to earn a living and to be productive. But dear Jesus, we know sometimes that we can overextend ourselves. And so I ask, dear Jesus, that you will help us in this moment right now to think about the many different activities that fill our lives. And help us to discern well the day in which that we can stop from our ordinary work to engage in that which will fill us with life, to continue to be at work for you. God, I pray that you will allow us to embrace this sacred day. And I pray that you'll help us to find enjoyment. And I pray, dear Jesus, that where each and every single person in this room this morning needs renewal, that you will encounter them powerfully this morning, allowing them to experience your transformative power through your Spirit, bringing a sense of restoration and reconciliation and a sense of life in what may seem dead. We trust you, God. We turn to you and we put our hope in you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.